Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles Tew, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, Objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on Objectivism or its application, just go to charlestew.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. Is it immoral to create art if people use it to escape reality? For example, are those who create video games, or it could be any other medium if you don't consider games to be art, to some extent to blame for video game addiction? Well, first of all, I don't recognize any such thing as video game addiction. Addiction refers to physical dependency. If you have a problem you can solve through exclusively mental means, just by thinking about it, then what you have is not an addiction, it is a bad habit. Anyway, the questioner goes on, what is the difference between an artist and a drug dealer? Aren't they both selling an escape from reality? Now, I do not consider video games to be art, although they can contain art. But I'm going to deal with video games first anyway, even though your question is about art. I'll get to that in a second. Many games have been designed around the idea of profiting by encouraging players to indulge in compulsive behavior. Now, that's objectively wrong. It's immoral. And so you can blame video game designers for that. It shouldn't be illegal, because I do not believe people are automatons. They have free will and they can choose not to play those kinds of games. But it is still bad to encourage them to do so. You know, many people seem to have this premise that multiple people can't be at fault for one thing, but that is false. If I encourage you to do something immoral and you do it, we are both morally culpable, even though you are the only one who took the action. It's not the case that either the game designers are to blame, and so you as a player have no responsibility, or you as a player have responsibility, and therefore whatever the game designers do is totally fine, because it's your choice. No, it's possible to try to get people to do bad things, and even though it's up to them whether they do it or not, encouraging them to do it is bad. But now we come to art. And you say, what's the difference between an artist and a drug dealer? Aren't they both selling an escape from reality? No, that's not what a legitimate artist is selling at all. Art is not about presenting a fantasy world that doesn't exist. Art is about presenting what's most important about the real world. It's a kind of hyper-reality. It's not an escape from reality. It's a focus on what's most important about this world. And this can be relatively superficial or shallow. I don't mean anything fancy. This doesn't have to be Dostoevsky or Ayn Rand. You can go watch The Avengers, and it can be something superficial about teamwork, whatever. Still, there's a theme. That's about the world. That presents a view of the world. This isn't just fantasy, something that doesn't matter and has no relationship to the real world. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if there were superheroes flying around or something like that? That's ridiculous. Yes, it's dramatic and fictional. Those concrete things aren't really happening, but they are fictional, concretized expressions of things that are true about the real world. So this whole idea of art as escapism, I reject entirely. That is completely wrong. Art is fuel. You read a novel, watch a movie, whatever, in order to see what's important about life and to see your values portrayed so that you know what you're fighting for in the real world. That is the exact opposite of escapism. That is the exact opposite of what you do when you buy heroin from a drug dealer. You are not using heroin for fuel to go pursue your productive career. You are using it to circumvent the proper feedback mechanism between taking actions that sustain your life and receiving pleasure for doing so, and then going and taking more actions, acting in the real world. You're circumventing that. You're doing the heroin instead of acting in the real world. But you consume art so that you can act in the real world. Next, if the government is voluntarily funded, how can I be sure that the government will have enough money from voluntary donations to protect me from violations of rights? Well, how can you be certain all the grocery stores in the world won't simultaneously refuse to sell people food until we all starve? Do we need government control over supermarkets then? Obviously, that is nonsense. That's simply not how people work. People will voluntarily fund the government in a free society. The fact that conscious creatures with free will are involved does not mean you can't identify laws about how they operate. Is the law of supply and demand invalid because it's a law about how people act? Do we have to throw out economics because it's a science of people? There's so many things wrong with this. If you're at the point where you're doubting that there are going to be enough people to fund the government, what makes you certain the government is going to work? How can you be sure people are going to do what they're supposed to do in the government? How can you be sure that people won't refuse to work for the government? What are you going to do then? Now, if human beings really were the kind of creatures who would, in fact, refuse to fund government in a free society, then you could justify taxation. I don't think it would do much good, because if human beings were that kind of creature, that would imply a lot of other things about them. That would probably mean they were doomed no matter what. But leaving that aside, this is just a question of fact. Now, I hope this makes some people uncomfortable, because I am stressing here how the legitimacy of capitalism depends on facts. This is not something written in the stars. This is not intrinsic, outside of all context. Capitalism, freedom are valid because of facts about the world. They are not a priori true or valid. And it is dangerous and superficial to think that way. Capitalism is true. Freedom is valid. The elimination of taxation is valid because of certain facts about what human beings are and how they operate. And one of the facts about how human beings operate is that they will voluntarily fund a government in a free society. Now, this only applies in a context, of course. If there's widespread philosophical resistance to freedom, then they may not fund it. But in that case, nothing's going to stop the collapse of that system. You're not going to be able to force people into freedom through government intervention. If most people are against freedom, how's the government going to stop them? Those ideas will influence people in the government. Next, if a politician could change one thing in the US, would privatizing education be the best choice? The reason being, the best ideas could drive out bad ones in a free market. Yes, if I could radically alter one aspect of the United States, it would be that one. I would privatize education. That would probably do the most good, although I think we would still be doomed. All of the cultural influences would still be bad. What teachers believed wouldn't magically change. Yes, people would be free to choose better schools, but people are free to do a lot of things that make sense, and they don't do them. People have been free to varying degrees throughout history to care only about the bottom line, and they often haven't. People make very bad decisions for ideological reasons, regardless of the practical consequences. So this would not be magic. Yes, it would allow people the freedom to make their own decisions, but most people make very bad decisions. The fact that going into gender studies is a terrible decision from a career perspective has not stopped many people from doing it. Many times parents are funding these college experiences. You don't have to go to college. The fact that many of these degrees are stupid and impractical has not stopped people from paying for them. So if you think the bottom line is going to stop people from making bad decisions, you are wrong. People ignore facts all the time, so if you think that the schools that just objectively get kids to read and write and do arithmetic better are going to be flush with customers because of the virtues they offer, well, I think you're mistaken. Some people will do that, but in a society as degraded as ours, I don't think the vast majority of people are going to let facts override their irrational philosophical premises. They clearly haven't in every other area. Why would they in education? If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charlestew.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charlestew and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.